Hey, it's syndicated radio talk show host, author, singer Al Cole, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. I come from CBS Radio. My shows are nationally syndicated, and I've helped pave the way to treating women, guys too, with the dignity that they deserve, and I do that in many ways. Through my services with Apple iTunes Radio Network, the interview show that I have, People of Distinction, aired on top networks through Apple. It's aired with CBS shows and Fox News, NPR, BBC, the whole kit and caboodle there. And we have people from all over the country and all over the planet coming on People of Distinction. I have companies nationally and internationally that introduce guests to my show. And the people who come on my show, boy, they talk it up about their creative endeavors and their social and sometimes even political directions that are meant to help our human family in our development. And I'm also a media consultant. That means that coming from CBS Radio, I know major media very, very, very well, and I help people to understand major media as well. For entrepreneurial purposes, they have something that they want people to know about their product and service. I teach people how to get it out there profitably and how to network with professionals in order to make a profit at what they do with their books, their coaching programs, podcasts, everything that they're doing in social media, digital media these days to make a profit from what they do. I'm also aligned with the great Ariana Huffington, the founder of the Huffington Post and her Thrive Global Network. And also I have my People of Distinction Humanitarian Awards events. They're national events that I put together in New York City, also Capitol Hill with members of the U.S. Congress, Florida, Atlanta, around the U.S. They become winners with honoring humanitarian and creative unsung heroes. You can check out my website, peopleofdistinction.org, for more. And also, you can email me at alcoholic@gmail.com. You heard me right. That's ALCOLEHOLIC@gmail.com. And I really want to thank my CBS radio listeners for coming up with that handle, Alcoholic. It seems like from day one, my listeners have been saying, Al, we love what you're doing there, brother. In fact, we're hooked on it. We're alcoholics. We love that. And you're going to love this lady, too. Her name is Ann Chatham, and she's calling all the way from down under. Down under, as we all know, that's Australia. And this lady has a great, great message to talk about with poetry. Her book is called Permission to Speak. Yeah, we all need that permission to speak. That's communication right there. Without communication, I'll tell you, there is no life. Life depends on consciousness, depends on awareness. And the best way that we know to actually communicate our awareness of life, our communication development with life, is through speaking. And one of the most effective ways of speaking is through poetry. Now, I'm a poet myself. I'm a poet, and I know it, just like Bob Dylan said. And poetry puts language together in very succinct ways, in very brief ways, to say large things. Poetry is the natural language of feeling. And feeling, when we look at it as emotional intelligence, is one step to getting to that spiritual awareness of life. When you were a baby and you were first born, I know that when you came out, you said, I love life. Thank you, life, for honoring me by being born at all. That's the greatest gift of all, just to be born alive. And we're all born alive. And after that, it's up to us to develop that beautiful relationship with life itself through our feelings, through our emotion intelligent aspects. And as we do that, now we're reaching out to other people and helping them with that emotional intelligence. And as we do that, we're helping our planet and we're helping ourselves to understand the reason for our birth, which really is love. Hey, that's the greatest feeling of all. Anne is going to be talking about that. She's going to be talking about love and her love for poetry and her love for some of the things that she says within her book, Permission to Speak. And that's why we're going to really have a great time here with Anne talking about poetry, talking about Permission to Speak. And she was brought to me by one of the top publishers around the world, and that's UR Link Publishing. So I want you to run to UR Link Publishing and get involved if you have a book out. And Anne's book is going to be out very shortly, and you can guide yourself to urlinkpublishing.com to get more information on it at that time. That's urlinkpublishing.com. Welcome, Anne, to People of Distinction with Al Cole. It's really a pleasure to have you on today. How are you, Anne?
I'm fine, thanks, Al. And you?
I'm doing great. And we're going to have a wonderful interview here. We're going to tell all the people about poetry, and particularly your book of poetry, Permission to Speak. Let's have it. The bottom line here, starting out with Permission to Speak. What is our permission to speak, Anne?
When I was much younger, I had some problem with sexual assault, and of course, as a child, you don't kind of know who to speak to or where to go or what even has happened, and so that got shut down because of my age, of course, of my inability to speak. And then as the years went on, the whole incident sort of got pushed into the background. And then I went to university and I did teaching. And of course, you know, in a classroom, you have some difficulty speaking about sexual assault as a child. And so that then became an issue until fairly recently. I wrote a lot, and I've been writing poetry since I was 12 years old. But the signature poem that gave me permission to speak was finally coming out about the particular sexual assault issue. And now it's out, and it's the signature poem in my collection of poetry. So that's where the name Permission to Speak has come from. After all of these years not having permission to speak, for all sorts of reasons. And then finally getting a permission to speak. So, and as well as all of that, then I have a collection of other poems, like the poems between the cover of this book tell the story of pain and suffering, justice and compassion, as well as curiosity and joy. This collection of poems records relationships between people and other creatures and living things.
Absolutely.
Some poems explore how an object such as a bell or a stone or a torn piece of fabric can trigger a story that must be told. There's humour in many of these pieces of work. There is also tragedy and suffering too. Some of these poems have a spiritual insight, a conversation with God, if you will, that troubled my sleep until I write it down. And that's sort of it pretty much in a nutshell, Al.
Wow, look at that. Hey, we love that. I'll tell you, you're talking about a lot of things there. Poetry, of course, is the spawning ground for that. And you're talking about sexual abuse. That's very prevalent in our world. We know that so many women have expressed themselves over, particularly the last few years, the Me Too movement. And you're expressing yourself in verse and poetry. You've now have the license to speak and that permission to speak. You mentioned your signature poem. Are you prepared to give us a little bit of that poem or recite, some of that poem in a minute or so? Would you be able to do that?
Yes, I certainly will. You want it? Well, I'll give you some background. When I was very small, I was born and bred in a small country farming town, and children in those little towns, they sort of, they wander around a fair bit. They're not restricted to the house, and I was a wanderer, and we were very poor. I lived in a little tumble-down shack in the middle of a very small town. So, being able to sort of get something for nothing was uppermost in the mind of particularly my mother. And so that's where the poem comes from. It's called An Empty Billy Can. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with a billy can, but it's like a tin bucket that in the country, when I was small, was used for lots of things. It was used like a saucepan. It was used on a campfire to cook tea or to make tea. And it's just the size. It's about the size of a small bucket, and that's what a billy can is. And that's important to know, to get an image of what that's like.
Yeah.
And that's what I had to take to my uncles. And here's the poem. You ready for it?
We're ready.
Okay. Right. Take this empty billy can to Uncle Albie's place. His nectarine tree is full of fruit, and they will go to waste. He asked that you, his favourite niece, would be the only one to help him gather up the fruit, and he would give us some. Albie was an ugly man, his face with tiny bubbles, unaware when I arrived that he began my troubles. He took me in and lied me down and licked his lips with glee, his tongue hang out his drooling mouth with what he'd done to me. She cooked the fruit that I took home and made it into jam. A week had passed. I went again for Albie's evil plan. Obedient child that I must be, a prostitute at only 3 with an empty billy can. Where can I go? I can't go back. If I tell Mum, I'll get a smack. But Nana said that God is near and he will show me not to fear. Nana says God's here with me, no matter where that here would be. So God and I became as one. He stayed from then when I was young. We grew together, God and me, the prostitute at only 3.
Wow. That is powerful. Very, very powerful, Anne. And, I'm going to make a reflection on that because it is so powerful. And I want my listeners to think about some of the things, particularly that you were talking about at a very young age. This goes out to you, my listening audience right now, on People of Distinction. At a very young age, Anne was sexually abused. It comes out clearly in that beautiful poem. She was only 3 years old. Now, understand, people, at 3 years old, we don't really know what sexuality is all about. At 3 years old, we can know what love entails. We can know what feelings are, and we can have a relatively good idea of what is good, what is not so good. But that can be reformulated by an individual at any point, the way that they persuade us into other areas. Anne was persuaded into an area that she intuitively felt was not good for her. But then, as she said in her poem, if I tell mom, I get a smack. See, we need to be more forgiving in our human family development. And that means a whole bunch of forgiveness all around the place. First thing is, as parents, we need to listen to our children better. Understand that our children are little human beings. They have everything that it takes to have us understand them and them understand us if we listen, if we read the poetry of their mind and their feelings, if we give them permission to speak with us. Now, it was clear from the poem that Anne, at a very young age, thought that she didn't have that permission. And so she kept it to herself. Could have gnawed at her, and it probably did. And see, that's one of the first ways of forgiving ourselves as parents for sometimes not reaching out to our children in the way that we should have. And maybe Anne has made peace with her mother at that point, or her parents in general. Another sort of forgiveness, divine forgiveness. Now, she was talking about a gentleman who she described as maybe being not too attractive and who used and abused her at a very young age. Maybe that person has suffered since. I don't know. Maybe Anne has forgiven that person since. I don't know. We'll ask her. Forgiveness doesn't necessarily have to be forgiving the individual, him or herself, for the transgression. It doesn't necessarily have to be forgiving the transgression itself. Forgiveness starts with self forgiveness, getting that monkey off of your back and not laying it on you. I venture to think, if Anne is like a lot of the other women who have been on my show over the years talking about sexual abuse, maybe at a certain point she felt guilty. Maybe she felt like, wow, maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I deserved it. As far out as that might seem, people, one of the things of sexual abuse, one of the ramifications is that sometimes the woman, in most cases, going to be a woman, feels that, wow, she feels guilty about it. Forgiveness is another step to release oneself from guilt and also to possibly even help that other person to grow in a better way, not necessarily even through a conversation with that person, although that might be one of the ways, but through that divine energy, that permission to speak in terms of, wow, God. Or if we want to rephrase it, in any spiritual way that we think of, when we connect to that spirit that got us here, that really is love. Well, it's easy to forgive that way. And we don't even necessarily have to speak to the transgressor. Maybe the transgressor will know just through that, maybe a prayer that we send out through that spiritual energy. There are a whole bunch of things here. It's a very deep poem that Anne just read. And now I want to get Anne's reflection on some of my reflections here. What I was saying, does that relate in any way to your experiences, Anne?
It certainly does. But you see, the forgiveness is fine. I went back to my hometown not so very long ago. Just how you go back and revisit where you were, and I went to the graveyard where many of my relatives are buried, and stood on Albie's grave and offered forgiveness at that point, in that place.
Yeah.
Yes, so that's what it was. I had to do that, and as you said, Al, the in order to forgive, forgiveness frees you, I think, from anger and frustration and whatever it is. Just a simple, yes, I forgive you, because he was a human being too. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what drives the hearts of people who feel the need to abuse others in all sorts of ways, not just sexual abuse, but in all sorts of ways. What we have to do, I think, is to give our children permission to speak.
Yes. Because
I felt guilty as a child as to, you know, I can't tell my mum what had happened. I mean, how would I tell her? Albie was her brother, you know, it was, and he, you know, you can't say Uncle Albie is horrible or he did this or that, or, you know, because, well, as I said, it was Mum's brother. So how would I be able to say that? But I'll tell you, every time he came to our house to visit, and he lived just up the road from us, I would run and climb a tree. We had a lot of trees in our backyard, and I'd sit there in a fig tree and wait until he left. Yeah. So I found myself running and hiding whenever I saw him come to the back door. So it was a torrid time when I was so small. But yes, forgiveness is important for me too. Because unless you forgive, you're tied up in that. You're tied up in some kind of anger and resentment and fear, I think, more than anything else. You get courage, I think. Forgiveness gives you courage. And it certainly did that for me, but it was much later in life.
Yeah, we get it.
And as I said before, I had no permission to speak all through my young years, because then it was suppress that, you know, just hide that, and then it'll go away. Doesn't though, although that's turned me into a poet, just the same.
Look at that, and it turned you into a wonderful lady of the poetry world that is now on People of Distinction with Al Cole. And people, I want you to order this book when the proper time is. Anne Chatham and her book, Permission to Speak. Go to yourlinkpublishing.com and they'll tell you when you can order that wonderful book, Permission to Speak, yourlinkpublishing.com. Just have a few minutes left in this great interview, and very gripping and very emotionally charged here for our listeners. I want to take it out with,
it's not all, the book of poetry is also not all gloom and doom. There is some lighter moments when I have a love of little things, insects and bugs and spiders and all the things that creep and crawl. Just for a minute, I'd like to just read you one more poem.
Yes, absolutely.
To take us out, if you like. And this is called For the Love of Little Things. For the love of little things, for things that crawl with tiny wings, where honeybees and blowflies sing. I grew a flower garden outside the window by my chair so I could watch them working and listen to their prayer. Tiny creatures, oft unnoticed, singing songs so soft and clear. Useful creatures, oft unnoticed, changing worlds both far and near. For the love of little things, I ponder life with tiny wings. They feed the world with what they do and take away our rubbish too, pollinating fruit and flowers, eating bodies dead for hours. Without such work, be body towers reaching to the moon. There are some creatures we will find, though very few to keep in mind, as with humans are inclined to sting and bite oft out of sight. Bugs we assault with slap and squeeze and tell the God we are displeased with a creature such as these and demand that he should stop. A timely world of humankind, our little ones are in decline. Stop killing off the bugs that feed your greed, for once they go, the world will know that absolutely nothing more will grow. For of the many thousand things that creep and crawl with tiny wings, I love bees most of all. Want to take it out with that one? Thanks, Al.
Yeah, we can take it out with that one. Wow, another one. A beautiful, beautiful poem there from the book. And we're calling it up here, Permission to Speak by Anne Chatham. And I'm going to end the show with a quick couple of cents of my own, underscoring the great work of Anne Chatham. And this is what I'm going to say to you, my listening audience right now, people. Don't be afraid of reaching out to life. Anne's book, Permission to Speak, is giving you that permission, as it has given Anne that permission, and as Anne gave herself to just write this book. Reach out to love in any way possible. Love is not always easy. We've heard of tough love. It's not always easy to forgive. That's one of the things we were talking about. On the other hand, it's easy to comport with nature. It's easy to have something on the inside that we can give to the outside world, and vice versa. Everything on the outside world can live within us as well. We can understand that. And maybe starting out with when you were just a little kid and you understood things maybe even better than the adult in you later on understood, as far as nature, as far as the bees, the birds and the bees. Get it? Birds and the bees doesn't have to be something that we sweep under the rug, that we call, oh boy, the stuff that we don't talk about. Let's talk about the birds and the bees in very natural ways, in ways that now we are part of nature. We relate to nature, and we say to nature, how can I serve you? Nature will have a way that we can serve nature, and as we serve nature, now we're filled with that love for life. We're filled with that beautiful intensity of emotional intelligence, as I talked about earlier, that now we can shoot out, transmit out there to other people. And as we do that, maybe other people can have a little bit more respect and love for nature as well. And as we do that, we can have a little bit more respect and love for ourselves, because we are all natural creatures. And as Anne likes to put it, poetry is the natural language of feeling. Get it? Natural language. Nature has so much to do with it, people. And that's another reason why I want you to order this book, Permission to Speak, by Anne Chatham, our special guest here today on People of Distinction. And I want you to go to this website where you can order it at the right time once it's out there. YouAreLinkPublishing.com. Thank you so much, Anne, for being my special guest here today on People of Distinction. It's really been quite a pleasure. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Al. It was good. Yep.